When my daughter got engaged, I made a decision I never told a single soul about. I let everyone in my family keep believing I was just a retired plumber scraping by on Social Security. And thank God I kept my mouth shut, because 3 weeks after I walked her down the aisle, my new son-in-law showed up at my door with a stack of papers and a man in a cheap suit trailing behind him. But the confident grin on his face didn't survive the next 20 minutes. Before I tell you exactly what happened in that kitchen, let me know where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe family should never be allowed to treat an old man like an obstacle, hit that like button and subscribe. My name is Walter Reese. I'm 68 years old. I spent 38 years installing and repairing pipes in other people's houses, crawling under sinks, sweating through summers in attics that felt like ovens, all so my little girl could have braces and a college fund and a childhood where she never once heard the word can't. I drive a truck with 210,000 miles on it. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation. I live in a modest brick house on a quiet street. And to anyone looking in from the outside, that's the whole story. That's all Derek ever saw when he looked at me. Derek Pruitt married my daughter Casey on a Saturday in June, in a backyard ceremony that I paid for out of pocket, $41,000, because Casey wanted string lights and a live string quartet and a dress from a boutique in the city, and I wasn't about to let her start her marriage feeling like her father couldn't provide. I wrote the check without blinking. I hugged Derek at the reception and told him to take care of my girl. I meant it with everything in me. What I did not tell him, what I did not tell Casey, what I did not tell a living soul outside of one office on the 40th floor of a building downtown, was that my late wife Marion had come from money. Real money. Old money. The kind that doesn't show up in the way a person dresses or the car they drive. Marion and I lived simple on purpose. We liked simple. We liked our small kitchen and our Sunday drives and pretending, for 39 years of marriage, that we were just like everybody else on the block. Derek never knew that. Derek only ever saw a broke old man in work boots, and he built his entire opinion of me on that mistake. 3 weeks after the wedding, on a Tuesday evening, Derek knocked on my door holding a leather folder under his arm. Casey wasn't with him. That should have told me everything right there, but I let him in anyway, because he was my daughter's husband, and I still believed, foolishly, that this was still a family built on trust. He introduced the man behind him as a notary he'd hired for some paperwork. I offered them both coffee. Derek declined. He sat down at my kitchen table like he owned it, opened the folder, and slid a document across the table toward me. "Walter," he said, and his voice had that practiced gentleness people use right before they hurt you. "Casey and I have been talking. We're worried about you being out here alone. This house, the yard, the upkeep, it's a lot for a man your age. We found a really nice retirement community about 20 minutes from us. Affordable, good staff. You'd have people checking on you every day." I kept my face still. "My health is fine, Derek. I mow my own lawn. I still fix my own plumbing." He waved his hand like I was a child arguing about bedtime. "That's not the point. The point is, we want to help you get ahead of this before something happens. We just need you to sign the house over into a family trust. Casey and I would manage it, and we'd handle selling it and getting you settled somewhere safer. Whatever's left after your care gets covered, we'd invest that for the future. For when we start our own family." The air went out of my lungs like someone had punched me. A retirement community. He wanted to put me in a home and sell the roof over my head to fund his own life, and he was calling it help. I looked past him toward the hallway, half expecting Casey to walk in and tell me this was some kind of joke. But she wasn't there. She hadn't come. My son-in-law had come alone to strip me of my house, and he hadn't even had the decency to bring my daughter to watch him do it. "Where's Casey?" I asked. "She's home. She didn't want to be here for this part. It's hard for her." He said it like I was supposed to feel sorry for her. I looked down at the gold pen he'd set on top of the document, at the little red tabs marking where I was supposed to sign, and something in my chest went cold and very, very quiet. I had learned a long time ago, working underneath other people's houses, that when a pipe bursts, you don't panic and start yanking on things. You shut off the water first. You assess before you act. I took a slow breath, and I let my hand tremble as I reached toward the pen, and I watched Derek's shoulders relax, watched the notary lean forward with his stamp ready, both of them certain the old plumber was folding without a fight. "I don't know," I said, letting my voice crack just slightly. "This is my home. Marion and I bought this house before Casey was even born. I don't know if I can just sign it away like this." Derek's jaw tightened. "Walter, we don't have all day. The notary charges by the hour. I let my hand hover, fingers shaking, right over that pen, and in that half-second I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not fear, but a strange, sharpening clarity. I needed time. Just a little time to make one phone call before I did anything else. I fumbled the pen on purpose, let it roll off the table and drop onto the kitchen floor, and pressed my hand flat against my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, breathing shallow. "I'm feeling dizzy all of a sudden. My chest feels tight. I think I need to sit somewhere quiet for a minute. Maybe get my blood pressure pills upstairs." Derek sighed like I was the biggest inconvenience of his week. "Fine, go. But be quick. We're not leaving until this is signed." I nodded, keeping my eyes on the floor, and made my slow, defeated shuffle toward the staircase, dragging my feet the way a broken old man would. The second I turned the corner at the top of the stairs, out of their line of sight, my posture straightened, my breathing evened out. I walked into my bedroom, the one Marion and I had shared for almost 4 decades, and I quietly turned the lock. I didn't go looking for blood pressure pills. I didn't need any. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone, and called a number I hadn't had to use in 6 months. It rang twice before a smooth, alert voice answered. "Walter, this is a surprise. Everything all right with the estate documents?" That was Preston Hale, Marion's attorney, a man who had structured every dollar of her family's holdings so carefully that not even the IRS could find a crack in it. I kept my voice low. "Preston, I need you to pull my file right now. My son-in-law is downstairs in my kitchen with a hired notary. They've got a document trying to transfer my house into a trust that he and Casey control. He's threatening to put me in a retirement facility and sell everything out from under me." There was a pause, then a low, dry laugh on the other end. "He has no idea what he's dealing with, does he?" "None," I said. "As far as he knows, I'm a broke plumber living off Social Security. Have you signed anything?" "Not a thing." I faked a dizzy spell and told him I needed to lie down. "Good. Let him keep thinking you're exactly what he believes you are. We'll use that." Preston's voice sharpened into business mode. "Go back downstairs. Stall if you have to, but do not sign a single page until I call you back." I thanked him and hung up. And before I put the phone away, I let my eyes drift to the dresser across the room, to the framed photograph sitting there of Marion in her gardening hat, laughing at something just out of frame, standing in front of the orchard on her family's property in the Hudson Valley. Derek had no idea that orchard existed. He had no idea that 11 years ago, watching how quickly Casey's college friends had started sniffing around our family once rumors of money surfaced, Marion had quietly and legally transferred the deed of that entire 140-acre apple orchard, land now worth close to $14 million, thanks to a vineyard boom that had swept through the valley, directly into my name and mine alone. She'd done it years before she got sick, years before Casey ever brought Derek home for the first time. She used to say that money changes the way people look at you, and she wanted to know, if it ever came down to it, who in our family actually loved us, and who was only circling the bank account. I touched the edge of the photo frame and felt something in my chest settle into place. I was not a broke old man. I was a man holding a $14 million secret, sitting on the edge of a bed while his son-in-law tried to steal a 3-bedroom house that wasn't even the real prize. I splashed water on my face, put my glasses back on, and walked back downstairs at the same slow, defeated pace I'd left with. Derek was pacing the kitchen. The notary was checking his watch. I sat back down at the table and looked at the document, like a man trying to make sense of something far beyond him. "I've been thinking about this upstairs," I said quietly. "This is a big decision, Derek. This was Marion's and my home. I raised Casey in this kitchen. I want to have my own lawyer look this over before I sign anything permanent." The mask on Derek's face cracked instantly. "A lawyer? Walter, come on. We don't have time for that. This needs to happen now." "No," I said, and for the first time my voice didn't waver at all. "I'm not signing today." That was the moment the real Derek stepped forward, the one who'd been hiding behind concerned son-in-law small talk for 3 weeks. He slammed his hand flat on the table hard enough to rattle the sugar bowl. "You selfish old man," he snapped. "We are trying to build a life. Casey and I have plans, and you sitting in this house rattling around by yourself doing nothing with it is holding us back. You think you're protecting something? You're just proving how useless you actually are. Don't talk about your wife's father like that," I said quietly, in his own kitchen. "It won't be your kitchen much longer," he said, leaning in close. "You know what happens if you fight this? I call Casey's mother's old doctor. I tell them you've been having memory problems, confusion, that you're a danger to yourself living alone. I get you declared incompetent, and I take control of everything anyway, except this way you don't get a say in where you end up. You want to do this the easy way or the hard way, old man, but either way, you end up out of this house. I looked at him for a long moment, at the son-in-law I had hugged at his own wedding 3 weeks earlier, and I felt something in me go very cold and very still. You'd really do that to your wife's father, I said, letting my voice tremble like I was breaking. Threaten to have me locked away? I'll do whatever it takes, he said, and he meant every word. I let my shoulders drop. I let my breath go shallow again, and I reached for the pen a second time, watching him relax, watching the notary lean forward eagerly, both of them convinced the old man had finally cracked. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and I let it slip and roll off the table again. My hands, I whispered, they're shaking too bad. I need my reading glasses. I can't see the lines clear enough to sign right. I don't want to make a mistake on something this big. Derek groaned and pinched the bridge of his nose. Go get your glasses. Hurry up. I nodded meekly and shuffled toward the stairs again. And the moment I was out of sight, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Preston. Walter, he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, sharp and urgent. Here's what we're going to do. Over the next hour, sitting quietly on the edge of my bed with the door locked, Preston laid it all out. The house, the little brick house Derek was so desperate to steal, meant nothing to him legally. It was a modest asset that any competent lawyer could tie up in probate court for months if it came to that. But if Derek genuinely believed I had nothing else, if he thought this 3-bedroom house was the whole prize, he would eventually get desperate and reckless, trying to secure it faster. Preston told me to let him think he was winning, to go back downstairs, stall as long as I reasonably could, and eventually, once he'd pushed hard enough, simply refuse and walk out. Let him watch me leave with a suitcase like a defeated old man. Let him celebrate. He's going to escalate, Preston warned. Men like this always do. Once they think the fight's already won. Just don't sign anything. Let him show you exactly how far he's willing to go. The further he goes, the less sympathy any judge or any family member will have for him later. I went back downstairs one final time, glasses on, and told Derek plainly that I would not be signing anything that day, that I needed time and independent legal counsel, and that if he and Casey truly cared about my well-being, they could come back and have an honest conversation instead of showing up with a hired notary and an ultimatum. Derek's face went through about 4 different colors. He called me selfish, stubborn, senile, a man too proud to accept help, even when it was staring him in the face. He told me that if I walked away from this table without signing, I could consider myself cut off, that I would never be welcome in his house, that if he and Casey ever had children, I would never meet them. I stood up slowly, walked to the hall closet, and took out my old canvas jacket. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply told him that I loved my daughter very much, and that I hoped one day he'd understand what he had just done. And I walked to the front door with my chin up and my back straight, refusing to give him the broken performance he wanted for the finale, because Preston had told me something important during that call, something that settled deep into my bones. A man who has already shown you his true face doesn't need you to keep pretending you haven't seen it. I heard the deadbolt slam behind me before I'd even reached the sidewalk. I didn't go to a motel that night. I drove 3.5 hours out to the Hudson Valley, to the orchard, arriving well past midnight under a sky thick with stars I never got to see from my street back home. The caretaker, a quiet man named Robbie who had worked the land for Marion's family for over 20 years, met me at the gate with a flashlight and a look of concern that melted into relief once he recognized my truck. I stayed in the old farmhouse that night, the one Marion had grown up visiting every summer as a girl, and for the first time in 3 weeks I slept like a man with nothing left to prove. 2 days later, Casey called me. Her voice was thin and confused. "Dad, Derek says you had some kind of breakdown, that you accused him of trying to steal the house, that you just left. What happened? Where are you?" I told her the truth, plainly and without embellishment. I told her what Derek had said, what he had threatened, what he'd tried to make me sign. I could hear her go quiet on the other end, the kind of quiet that comes from a person trying to decide whether to believe their father or their new husband. "He said you were confused, Dad. He said you weren't making sense." That hurt worse than anything Derek had said to my face. "I'm not confused, sweetheart," I said. "I'm sitting in Marion's family orchard right now, the one you visited twice as a little girl and probably don't remember, because your mother wanted to keep it quiet from everyone, even you, until the right time. I didn't sign anything because your husband tried to threaten me into it, not because I've lost my mind." There was a long silence. "What orchard, Dad?" I realized then just how completely Marion and I had buried this secret, so deep that even our own daughter had no memory of it. I told Casey she should come see it for herself, and hung up gently, giving her the space to sit with what she'd just learned and to decide on her own, without me pushing, which version of this story she actually believed. 3 days after that, my phone rang again. This time it was Preston, and his voice had that particular sharpness I'd come to recognize as trouble moving fast. "Walter, your son-in-law is not a patient man. He's filed a petition." My stomach dropped. "A petition for what?" "Guardianship," Preston said. "He's telling the court you're exhibiting signs of cognitive decline, that you disappeared without explanation after a family visit, that you're a vulnerable adult who left your home in a confused state and can't be located by family. He's asking the court to appoint him as your legal guardian, which would give him control over your finances and your medical decisions." I sat down hard on the porch steps of the farmhouse, staring out over rows of apple trees heavy with fruit that would be harvested in a few weeks. "He's trying to have me declared incompetent. He's trying to do it fast, before you can build a defense," Preston said. "He clearly thinks you're isolated out there with no one watching your back. He has no idea I've been documenting every single thing that's happened since that call 3 weeks ago." I thought about telling Preston to fight it immediately, to file whatever needed filing to shut Derek down before this went any further. And for one hot moment, that's exactly what I wanted. But then I thought about Marion, about the conversation we'd had 6 months before she passed, when the cancer had already taken so much of her strength, but none of her sharpness. She'd held my hand in that same bedroom where I'd made my first call to Preston, and told me that if anyone in our family ever showed their true colors over money, I shouldn't rush to stop them. I should let them show me exactly who they were, all the way to the end, because half measures only let people convince themselves later that they were misunderstood. "Preston," I said slowly, "don't fight the petition yet. Let it move forward. Let the hearing happen. Walter, that's a risk. If a judge even briefly grants him emergency guardianship, I trust you to make sure that doesn't happen," I said. "But I want him standing in that courtroom, in front of a judge, having to say out loud everything he's done. I want it on the record. I don't want this quietly going away. I want it public." Preston was quiet for a moment, and then I heard something that sounded almost like respect in his voice. "All right, we'll let him walk into it." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, in a county courthouse 40 minutes from my old house. In the meantime, Casey drove out to the orchard on her own, without Derek, and stood in the farmhouse kitchen with tears in her eyes, as I showed her old photographs of her mother as a little girl picking apples with her own grandfather. I told her everything: the money, the years of living simple by choice, the reason Marion had never wanted it known. Casey sat at that kitchen table for 4 hours, and by the end of it she wasn't looking at me like a confused old man anymore. She was looking at me like her father. "Dad," she said quietly, wiping her eyes, "Derek filed papers to have you declared incompetent. He told me it was for your own protection." "I know," I said gently. "I let him." She stared at me. "You let him?" "Your mother taught me that some lessons only stick when a person is allowed to walk all the way to the edge of the cliff on their own 2 feet, I said. "I wasn't going to stop him from showing you exactly who he is." The morning of the hearing, I put on the one good suit I owned, the same one I'd worn to Casey's wedding, and walked into that courtroom with Preston beside me, carrying a briefcase full of documents Derek had no idea existed. Derek was already seated at the other table with a lawyer of his own, dressed sharp, looking confident, glancing back at me with something close to pity, the same look he'd given me across my kitchen table 3 weeks earlier. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, opened the proceedings by asking Derek's attorney to state the grounds for the guardianship petition. Derek's lawyer stood and described an elderly man showing signs of confusion, disappearing from his home without notice, exhibiting erratic behavior, a vulnerable adult who needed protection from himself. When it was our turn, Preston stood slowly, adjusted his glasses, and calmly informed the court that the erratic disappearance in question was, in fact, Mr. Reese driving to visit family property he had legally owned for over a decade. That Mr. Reese had been in regular, coherent contact with his daughter throughout, and that the true context behind this petition was that Mr. Pruitt had attempted to coerce his father-in-law into signing over his primary residence 3 weeks earlier under threat of institutionalization, a threat that was, in fact, recorded. Derek's face went pale. Recorded? Preston reached into his briefcase and produced a small audio device. Mr. Reese's home security system includes audio recording for insurance purposes, standard for a man living alone. Every word spoken in that kitchen on the evening in question was captured. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play a portion of it. I watched Derek's lawyer's face fall as Preston pressed play, and my son-in-law's own voice filled that courtroom, cold and threatening, telling me he'd have me declared incompetent whether I cooperated or not, telling me the easy way or the hard way, telling me I'd never see grandchildren if I didn't sign. The judge's expression hardened with every sentence. Casey, sitting in the front row beside me, put her hand over her mouth. When the recording ended, the silence in that courtroom was heavier than anything I'd felt in that kitchen 3 weeks earlier. The judge looked directly at Derek. Mr. Pruitt, is that your voice on this recording? Derek's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out, exactly the way it had when I first fumbled that pen off my kitchen table, except this time there was no more room to stall. I was frustrated. He finally managed. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. It sounds fairly clear to me, the judge said flatly. This petition is not just unsupported, Mr. Pruitt. It appears to have been filed in an attempt to weaponize the court against a man you had already attempted to coerce and threaten. I'm not only denying this petition, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of possible elder coercion and attempted fraud charges. Derek's lawyer immediately requested a private conference, whispering urgently, but the damage was already sitting in the official court record, permanent and undeniable. Derek sat frozen at that table, the same stunned, drained expression on his face that I imagined had been on mine 3 weeks earlier when he first slid that document across my kitchen table. Outside the courthouse, Casey stood beside me on the steps, staring at her husband as he was escorted away by his own attorney, deep in a hushed and panicked conversation. She didn't go to him. She stood next to me instead, her arm looped through mine, and for the first time since her wedding day, I felt like I had my daughter fully back. I had no idea, she whispered. I really thought he was trying to help you. I know, I said. That's exactly what he wanted you to think. In the weeks that followed, the district attorney's office did open an inquiry into Derek's conduct, and while the coercion charge ultimately settled into a quiet plea deal rather than a dramatic trial, it was enough to end his career at the investment firm downtown. No financial company wants their name anywhere near an elder exploitation inquiry, and enough to end his marriage. Casey filed for divorce 2 months later, not out of spite, but because, as she told me over coffee one morning, she couldn't build a life with a man who had looked her own father in the eye and threatened to have him locked away for a house that wasn't even worth what Derek imagined it was. Derek moved back in with his parents in Ohio. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he took a job managing a rental car counter at the regional airport, a long way down from the confident young man who'd once slid a legal document across my kitchen table like he already owned everything on the other side of it. I never once gloated. I never once threw the $14 million in his face, though Preston assures me I certainly had every legal right to. Instead, once the dust settled, Casey and I drove out to the orchard together on a cool October morning, the trees heavy with fruit, and I told her the rest of what her mother had wanted, the part I hadn't shared yet. Marion hadn't just protected that land out of caution. She'd left specific instructions, tucked into the trust alongside the deed, that if anyone in our family ever tried to exploit either one of us for that money, the land itself would never be sold to developers or turned into vacation homes. It would become what Marion always dreamed it could be. A working orchard that trained young people aging out of foster care in a real trade, harvest work, orchard management, small business skills, giving them the kind of steady, dignified independence Marion herself never had growing up. Casey cried when I told her that, not out of grief this time, but something closer to pride. We spent that whole harvest season together, side by side in the orchard rows, and by the time the first frost came, she had moved out of the city entirely and taken a small cottage near the farmhouse, closer to me than she'd been in years. I still wear the same 3 flannel shirts. I still drive that old truck, though Casey's been on me to finally retire it. I never became a man who needed marble floors or fancy suits to feel like himself, and I don't intend to start now. But I learned something in that courtroom, watching my son-in-law's voice play back to a room full of strangers, something I carry with me every single morning I walk out into those orchard rows. Love does not mean staying silent while someone tries to walk over you. And it does not mean handing over everything you built just to keep the peace with someone who was never really trying to keep it with you. Sometimes, the kindest thing an old man can do, for himself and for the family he still has left, is simply refuse to sign. If you've ever had someone underestimate you because of how simple your life looked from the outside, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments below where you're watching from tonight, and what you would have done sitting at that kitchen table. Thank you for spending this time with me today, and I hope you have a truly peaceful evening.